Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Israeli occupation army has pursued its bombardment on the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding several people. The Sahrawi representative of the Polisario Front to the UN and coordinator of MINURSO has said that the continuous attacks by the Sahrawi People's Liberation Army against Moroccan forces are a direct response to the conditions of the occupation state. And humanitarian organizations have sounded the alarm regarding worrying situation that has prevailed for a year in Sudan, warning of a real sick or risk of famine. And the Mexican Foreign Affairs Ministry has denounced Ecuador's police raid into its embassy in Quito. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. Good afternoon. Joining me today in the reading of this bulletin, my colleague Majid Mela.
Hello,
Majid.
Mohammed. Hello.
Hi. So first now news. The Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab has extended his condolences on the death of journalist Houria Ayari at the age of 53 following a long illness. In his condolence message, the Communication Minister offers his sincere condolences and expressed his deep compassion to the family of the deceased and the entire media family, praying to Allah Almighty to surround the deceased with His holy mercy and to lend his family and loved ones patience and forbearance. Late Houria Ayari worked as a journalist in several national press positions or outlets including Al Yawm, Al Fajr and Al Shuruq Al Yawmi before joining Al Shuruq News. Member of the National Secretariat, representative of the Polisario Front to the United Nations and coordinator with MINURSO, Sidi Mohamed Ammar, has reaffirmed that the continuous attacks carried out by the Sahrawi People's Liberation Army against the entrenchment of the Moroccan occupation forces are a direct response to the conditions of the occupation state, especially those related to a ceasefire. Sidi Mohamed Ammar pointed out on the occasion the set of conditions announced by the Moroccan occupying state following the recent meeting with the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura. After recalling the history of the United Nations settlement plan and the obstacles hindering its implementation by the Moroccan occupying state, Sidi Mohamed Ammar stressed that the root cause of the stalemate in Western Sahara is the lack of political will from the Moroccan occupying forces or army to move towards a just and lasting solution, and the failure of the UN Security Council, under the influence of some of its active members, to respond firmly to the obstructive Moroccan position and ensure the full implementation of MINURSO's mandate. Evoking the impact of the ongoing regional and international developments on the Sahrawi issue in light of the predominance of some forces and their use of double standards, Sidi Mohamed Ammar stressed that the constant element in the complex conflict equation and the variables surrounding it are the Sahrawi people who believe in the fairness of their cause and strongly support the leader of their struggle. With regard to the outcome of the Security Council consultation session that will be held next week, the representative of the Polisario Front at the United Nations and the coordinator with MINURSO stressed that despite the decisions or actions that may be issued by the Council, the Sahrawi people will continue its struggle until its legitimate aspirations for freedom and independence are fully fulfilled. Over to you, Majid.
The Israeli army has pursued its bombardments of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding several people. Some Palestinian sources said at least 5 people were killed and 30 others wounded in the Israeli airstrikes launched against Gaza. Several other Palestinians were killed in the strikes which targeted the central areas of Dar al-Balah and the refugee camp of Nusayrat, as well as the southern towns of Khair Yunis and Rafah. Scores of houses and residential buildings have been destroyed by in the central area of Nusayrat. Over 33,600 people have been killed since the Israeli army launched its attacks on Gaza 7 months ago. The United Nations humanitarian organizations and several countries have called for the opening of direct supplying routes towards the northern part of the enclave where the population face famine conditions. In this respect, the United Nations humanitarian coordinator for the Palestinian territories, Jamie Goldrick, called for an access to humanitarian aid to feed the population which deprived of all basic needs. Meanwhile, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa said the efforts were made to bring the Jewish settlers before the International Criminal Court. He warned that the attacks launched by the Jewish settlers would not prevent the Palestinians from defending their land and running counter the expulsion plans of the Palestinian population. To you, Mohammed.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has announced the appointment of Jordanian Mohamed Hadi as his new Deputy Special Coordinator and Resident Coordinator of the Office of the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, United Nations Special Coordinator Office. Mr. Hadi will also serve as Humanitarian Coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territories. He succeeds James Eugene McGoldrick of Ireland, to whom the UN Secretary General is grateful for his dedication and service. Having served since 2020 as Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syrian crisis, Mr. Hadi brings more than 30 years of extensive international experience in humanitarian affairs and development work. Previously, he served as Regional Director of the World Food Programme, WFP, for the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe from 2015 to 2020, as well as Regional Coordinator of WFP Emergencies for the Syrian crisis between 2012 and 2015, and as WFP Representative Country Director in Syria from 2009 to 2012. And in Haiti, the Transitional Presidential Council has been officially created 1 month after disputed Prime Minister Mr. Ariel Henry resigned. Its creation is provided for by a decree signed by the Prime Minister, which stressed that the mandate of the Presidential Council entrusted with restoring law and order in the country would expire by February 2026. Over to you, Majid, again.
Yeah, humanitarian organizations have sounded the alarm regarding the worrying situation that has prevailed for a year in Sudan, warning for a risk of famine. In a press conference organized by the World Health Organization in Geneva, Thayer Schreider of the United Nations has noted that the possibility of famine in Sudan is very real because food production has been greatly reduced and household incomes have fallen. In a video conference from Kenya, the head of the delegation of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Farid Abdul Qadir, stressed that the food crisis facing Sudan is the biggest current humanitarian crisis. He warned that if nothing is done now, the crisis within the country will grow, more people will be in need. He thinks the consequences of the crisis will be quickly cross borders. For its part, the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières launched an appeal for an urgent intensification of the humanitarian response, urging the United Nations to show more will to actively contribute to a rapid increase and massive humanitarian aid. According to the United Nations, in the coming months, nearly 5 million people in Sudan could plunge into catastrophic food insecurity, the highest level of the Integrated Food Security Classification Framework scale, adding that the fighting in Sudan, which has raged since April 15, 2023, between the army and the rapid support forces, has left thousands of deaths and more than 8 million displaced. Back to you again, Mohammed.
Thank you. And still in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, where 188 terrorists have been killed by the government forces during operations carried out in the northern and southern regions of the country. The defense minister, Mr. Edward Buba, stressed 330 people suspected of terrorist activities and banditry were arrested. He added that 133 hostages were released and 270 weapons were seized during an operation carried out in oil-producing areas in the southern part of the country. And the Mexican Foreign Affairs Ministry has denounced Ecuador's police raid into its embassy in Quito. It said having sent a letter to the UN Secretary General in which it denounced the serious violations incurred by the Republic of Ecuador on April 5. The Ecuadorian police stormed Mexico's embassy in Quito to arrest former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass just hours after he was granted political asylum. The Ecuadorian assault caused Mexico to sever ties with the country. And finally, in Australia, 6 people were arrested, stabbed to death, and several others injured in a shopping center in Sydney. 8 people, including 1 child, were taken to hospital following the attack. Local sources reported that the assailants were killed later on. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Before moving on to our news programs, let's remind you the major headlines. The Israeli occupation army has pursued its bombardment of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding several people. The Sahrawi representative of the Polisario Front to the UN and the coordinator of MINURSO has said that the continuous attacks by the Sahrawi People's Liberation Army against Moroccan forces are a direct response to the conditions of the occupation state. And humanitarian organizations have sounded the alarm regarding worrying situation that has prevailed for a year in Sudan, warning of a real risk of famine. And the Mexican Foreign Affairs Ministry has denounced Ecuador's police raid into its embassy in Quito. And as I said before, with this we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for a weekly program, started with my colleague Hannah Dalil with this special program devoted to architecture, followed by another program about famous figure Tin Hinan by my colleague Aziza Gassias for me, and my colleague will be back tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International, and bye-bye for now.